have assembled subject matter experts from across the country that will focus on the technologies, CAVs, UAS, and AAM. Blaine is going to stick with us. The session will be moderated by Chris Sarakis on Blaine's team at the Utah Department of Transportation. Chris is a project manager in the Transportation Technologies Division, and I will kick it to Chris.
All right, Muriel, thank you. Hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to do a quick check there. All right, well, welcome to this next session for the panel here we have on technology, staying on the cutting edge of multimodal technologies. So with us, we have 3 awesome technical experts that can help us in this discussion. So we're going to learn from them about how they can innovate regarding transportation technologies such as the CAVs, UASs, and the AAM, and how these technologies will revolutionize the way people and goods move around our communities, the country, and around the world. So first off, let me get my screen switched here to share here. Blaine Leonard is going to be our first presenter. Blaine, besides being my direct supervisor, is also experienced professional engineer with a focus on connected and automated vehicle technology, with demonstrated experience deploying these technologies beneficially. Active participant and leader in national committees, activities and conferences related to connected and automated vehicles, specifically related to the public sector role in these technologies. Next, we have James Grimsley from, he's the Executive Director of the Advanced Technology Initiatives of the Choctaw Nation and Transportation Commissioner for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation. James Grimsley was appointed to the position of Executive Director of Advanced Technology Initiatives within the newly created Division of Strategic Development in June of 2019. Mr. Grimsley has been on contract with the Choctaw Nation as an Executive Technology Advisor. Mr. Grimsley is a nationally recognized expert on policy and technology related to unmanned aircraft, drones as we know them, and autonomous systems. Finally, we will have Mr. Clint Harper, former colleague at UDOT, but now with the Urban Air Mobility Fellow. Clint Harper synthesizes 21 years of diverse aviation experience, a passion for urban design and community engagement. An Air Force veteran, Clint's military experience includes aircraft. Sorry, my screen just went funny here. Aircraft dispatch, airport operations, airport planning, heliport planning. After his military career, he pursued his love of cities with a Master of City and Metropolitan Planning degree and graduate certificate in urban design. Clint put this work all to work for the Utah Division of Aeronautics, where he led efforts to better integrate general aviation airports with their host communities through economic development opportunities. So with that, we'll start off with Blaine. Yeah, I'd like to take over for your presentation. I can help you if you have anything stuck there.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Appreciate that introduction, and it's a great opportunity for me to be with everybody today. Sorry that you get me sort of 2 hours in a row. That's just kind of how this worked out. Let me pull my screen up here. The goal here today is to talk a little bit about the technologies that are enabling these new mobility changes in our lives. You can see the slide okay, Chris?
Yeah, it looks great, Blaine.
Great, thank you. So everything about how we move is changing. I like to think about this current shift in mobility as something that's based on 6 trends, 6 very unique but connected trends, if you will. The first one is demographic shifts. We in the United States in particular, but in many other countries, are an aging population, and that changes driving habits and driving characteristics and how we manage transportation. We also, at the other end of the spectrum, have a very different set of attitudes in the millennial population towards driving, towards automobile ownership, and generally how they travel. In addition to that, we all recognize that we are inundated with data. We have data coming at us all the time. Traditionally, transportation agencies generated data from their systems in-house, but now we're in a position where there's a lot of outside data. People have figured out how to monetize transportation data, something I wouldn't have imagined 5 or 10 years ago. But we have an overwhelming amount of data, and we can use that very beneficially. Third, we're all recognizing the shift in what we are calling mobility as a service or mobility on demand. The ability to move in different ways at the drop of a hat, ride sharing, on-demand vehicle rental, on-demand bicycles or scooters, trip bundling, all kinds of things that change the options we have on how we move. Fourth, vehicle propulsion. We see a significant shift towards electrification of our vehicle fleet. It's going to take a long time to get there, but there's significant momentum in that industry and other sorts of propulsion as well. A lot of discussion about hydrogen, for instance. Fifth, connected vehicles, the ability for vehicles to talk to each other wirelessly, to talk to the infrastructure, and to talk to other travelers. And sixth, automated vehicles, the concept that at some point the vehicle will take over some or all of the driving experience. We have today driver assistance systems available in most new cars, automated driving in certain domains, and the promise of fully autonomous driving at some point in the future. These 6 trends interact with each other, influence each other, but they all have different purposes, different origins, and different pathways. Finally, in addition to these 6 transforming trends, we have the other one that's very pertinent to our discussion today, advanced air mobility. And we've heard a lot about some of those options, air taxis, passenger drones, package delivery, a lot of things that are changing how we move. So these form the foundation for this huge transformation that's going on. I'm going to dive into just 2 of these in some detail here for the next few minutes: automated vehicles and connected vehicles. Automated vehicles use a suite of sensors to see what's going on around them. GPS, LiDAR, radar, digital imagery, whether that be visible light or infrared or near infrared. And the vehicles can now, with these sensors, see in 360 degrees all of the time. The idea here is to take some or all of the driving functions away from the human. We talked about safety. Steve Kusiemba in the previous session talked about safety. We know that a significant number of crashes have an element of human error in them, upwards of 95%. And so the idea is to take away some of those human elements that are problematic and make the vehicle safer and more efficient, change the riding experience. People often say, well, when is this coming? Well, to some degree, it's here today. Most new cars you buy today have some level of automated feature built into them, adaptive cruise control, for instance. And many vehicles now, some vehicles now have advanced to the level of what we call level 2 automation. You can get automated features in the vehicle that will, under certain circumstances, control the vehicle in both a longitudinal and a lateral direction. We're seeing a lot of experimentation, a lot of testing and development of higher levels of automation. And in a few cases, like Waymo in the Phoenix area, some limited deployment of those technologies for the public. As has been indicated earlier, these technologies not only impact sort of our passenger vehicles, but they have a real promise in freight. Maybe one of the earliest users of some of these advanced technologies. They have a role in transit, and they certainly have a role in package delivery. And so there's a broad spectrum where these technologies play in. At some point in the future, we'll get to a point where the vehicle will totally drive itself in any condition at any time. We suspect that's maybe at least a couple of decades away, but it will change our experience in how we move. A quick example of one of these technologies that we deployed in Utah 2 years ago for about 15 months, we deployed an automated vehicle, low-speed electric shuttle in 8 locations. And it was a joint project with our transit agency, the Utah Transit Authority. Over a period of time at these 8 locations, we carried almost 6,900 riders. And importantly, 98% of them said they felt safe. We talk about public perception. We talk about demonstrations. Michael Huerta talked about that in the last session. Getting people to experience it and feel it makes a difference. Let me shift real quickly then to connected vehicles, a very different paradigm. The concept of connected vehicles is to use wireless technology to allow the vehicles to communicate with each other, with the roadside infrastructure, such as traffic signals or other signage, and with other travelers. The idea here is not necessarily to remove the driver from the driver's seat, but to help the driver drive more efficiently. And of course, as Steve Kusiemba talked about, marrying automated and connected vehicle technologies together will produce a broad range of benefits. In Utah, one of the things we've done with this technology, recognizing a low-hanging fruit, if you will, in this capability, is to work again with our transit agency to provide two-way communication between the bus and the traffic signal, and give the buses a little early or extra green time when they're behind schedule, so they can get back on schedule. Again, we use V2I wireless communication in the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum using dedicated short-range communication devices. These have been operational since late 2017, and we added additional corridors over the next several years. And we've demonstrated that this can help improve schedule reliability and performance. Just a word, since we're talking about technologies, about these specific communications technologies. The direct communication in the 5.9 gigahertz band, and John Harding in some opening comments talked about that band, is very fast and very effective at moving bits of data between vehicles or between vehicle and the infrastructure directly and very quickly. Traditionally, over the past 15 years, we've used DSRC, dedicated short-range communication, to do that. About 4 or 5 years ago, a new technology was introduced called cellular vehicle to everything, or CV2X. It's important to note that although cellular is in the name because it uses the standards that were developed for cell communication, this is a direct communication, not going through a cell network, just exactly like DSRC does, just uses different physics to get it done. The FCC is currently reducing the bandwidth we have available, a very troubling thing for most of us, to make it more difficult for us to use this spectrum effectively. And they're also mandating that we will gradually switch over, those of us who've deployed DSRC, to CV2X technologies. I will note that there are technologies in the connected vehicle world that do use cellular through the cell tower communications. There are applications that use today's 4G LTE cell network going through a tower. It's higher latency. It's really not suitable for low latency crash prevention devices, but can provide some benefits and some day one kinds of applications. Noting that purchasing cell service is part of the need there. We hear a lot about 5G cellular. It's the next generation for our cell phones. The 5G that you buy today is an early version of what ultimately will be real 5G, I like to call it. And real 5G is not quite here yet. It's a bit overhyped in my opinion, but nonetheless, as this comes along, it will be lower latency, and there's opportunity there for 5G to be used. It's important to note that it's not intended that 5G will replace these direct communications in the 5.9 gigahertz band, and 5G will still require cell towers and subscription services. So in closing, over the last 100 years, we've made a lot of progress in surface transportation, a lot of innovation, a lot of changes, and there are more to come. We're excited about those. We're excited about the benefits of those, and we're working hard on the technologies that enable those. I look forward to the rest of the conversation today. Thank you. Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, awesome, Blaine. Thank you so much. That was excellent. So if just a quick reminder for everybody, if you have some questions that you'd like to ask our panelists, please put them into the chat window, and we'll look to get to those at the end of our period here. So, all right, excellent. Next up, James Grimsley from Oklahoma is going to enlighten us on what he has in store for his area and how it can integrate with what we're doing on this topic today. All right, James, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. And do a quick audio check. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you're sounding great, and I could see your presentation, so thank you.
Perfect, thank you. All right, well, very honored to be here today to talk about this. The presentations thus far have been very, very exciting and enlightening, and there's definitely some common themes here. So my name is James Grimsley. I am the Executive Director for Advanced Technology Initiatives with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And part of my job is, there's really two facets to my job. I'm looking at the technologies that are opportunities for the tribe. We invest in technologies, we invest in things. And so we're looking at what are the economic opportunities on the horizon, but we're also looking at how will technology change and impact the lives of our tribal members and our community neighbors and partners. And so really, it's kind of a fun time to be involved in all of this, because there's so much growth happening, so much convergence of technologies. The Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma as a background is the southeastern 11,000 square miles of southeastern Oklahoma. We were the first tribe to move across on the forced relocation in the 1830s on the Trail of Tears. It settled into this area. I actually grew up within the Choctaw Nation. Both sides of my family go back many generations within the Choctaw Nation, and I have Choctaw cousins on both sides of the family, and really grew up in the Choctaw culture. The Choctaw culture has heavily influenced this area, and there's really not a lot of difference between the southeastern Oklahoma culture and the Choctaw culture. They've had a very positive impact always on the area. But historically, when I grew up in this area, it was a very impoverished area. We had deep problems with generational poverty, lack of opportunity, and there really was a net exit. People, if you found an opportunity to leave, you did. And that's what happened with me. I was the first college graduate of my family. I found the opportunity to go get an education, take advantage of that, and I left. 35 years, worked in aviation. I was an aerospace engineer. My graduate work was all mechanical engineering. So I worked primarily in aviation, defense, things like that for roughly 20 years, and then ended up at the University of Oklahoma as an associate vice president for research. And that's how I reconnected with the Choctaw Nation. They had reached out to me while I was at the University of Oklahoma and asked me to do some consulting for them. They had some ideas. They bought some large property that I'll talk about here in a moment. But this is an area that has been transformed significantly in the last 30 to 35 years. And I'll talk about how the transportation challenges we have are playing out. The tribe itself does not exist. We do not collect taxes on our members, and so we have no tax revenue or tax base. We exist solely on our commercial revenue, primarily gaming, hospitality, retail. We just this summer opened an expansion of our Durant Casino, one of our casino resorts that we own, and it's now the 5th largest casino resort in the world, actually within the Choctaw Nation, and we have several others. We also have opened up our own supermarkets. We've created our own brand of supermarkets that we open and build in food deserts. Believe it or not, in agricultural areas and rural areas, there are food deserts. And so we have been making those types of investments to try to improve not only the health and quality of life of our tribal members, but also all of our regional partners. And so the revenue that we earn, we turn around and invest that into health programs. We provide health services to our tribal members. We invest in infrastructure. We invest in education. So we turn around and try to do things to raise the standard of living. Now, what we're trying to do, part of my job is also diversify. While we have the good fortune of being able to have these sources of revenue, we're diversifying our economy to look at how we can create new jobs, new opportunity across the entire reservation area. So I was contacted by the Choctaw Nation back around 2016. They had bought a large tract of land, and they came to me with a simple proposition. They said, how can we use this to get involved in aviation innovation? We want to be involved in aviation in some way. It was a very simple proposition. And they bought a 44,500 acre, roughly that number, acre private ranch that had been built by a billionaire in the energy industry. He had started aggregating and putting all this property together and built a beautiful, pristine ranch in the area, and he needed to sell it, and the tribe was able to buy it. And so they came to me with that simple proposition, and I was somewhat skeptical. You know, I laid out all the negatives. I said, it's a rural area. There's a lot of challenges with infrastructure, a lot of problems. But as I started talking to my peers, we started to realize that they were sort of onto something. Being a tribal government that's recognized as a sovereign nation by treaty, they have a lot of unique abilities to do things that even sometimes states or local communities cannot do. And so as we started exploring the opportunity, right about the time that I finished a series of reports for the Choctaw Nation, it outlaid kind of some ambitious, audacious goals if they wanted to pursue those, is when the UAS IPP, the Integration Pilot Program solicitation, came out. This was something that came out in the first year of the previous administration. And we were very well suited to go after it. So the tribe asked me to continue to consult and put a proposal together. We did, we won. We were selected as one of the original 9 active participants in the IPP and the only tribal government. And to my knowledge, the first tribal government that's ever been involved in something like this. So we sort of made history there. Very successful. It really transformed a lot of the things we were doing, brought a lot of opportunities, brought a lot of industry partnerships that would not have been possible any other way. That program, the IPP, wound down in October of 2020, and the FAA and US DOT moved us into a new program called Beyond, which we are focusing on beyond visual line of sight applications, small package delivery, enhanced community engagement, a lot of the things that we really need to do to move drone operations and advanced drone operations forward in the United States. And so it's been an incredible experience. The Beyond program has around 8 lead participants, so it sort of narrowed a little bit from 9 under the IPP down to 8. But this is a program that will still be underway for another roughly 3.5 years. And so we're just now sort of beginning that. So kind of here's the real busy slide that I show. The property that I talked about, the tribe had bought this several years ago and literally came to me with that simple proposition. They said, we wanted to do something innovative. And as I talked to my peers, they said, well, being a tribe, they have some unique abilities to control ground risk. And if you think of aviation testing, especially emerging technologies, there are 3 things that you really worry about in managing risk. You worry about risk of collision or damage on the ground. So that's a ground risk. You worry about risk of injury or death on the ground. So that's also a ground risk. And then you worry about risk of collision in the air. So those 3 things that you look at, 2 of them typically involve the ground. And if you have some sovereign control or some ability to completely control that ground risk, you can take a couple of those off the table pretty easily. And so as we started looking at it, we decided that we could easily manage ground risk because it has so much area, it's sparsely populated. We are a tribal government recognized as a sovereign nation. So we decided that we would build an ability to manage air risk and just stack on technologies. You know, there is no single technology that can completely cover all the risks, manage risks for aviation safety. So we realized that if we could stack technologies like ground-based radar, other things, ADSB, all of these things, that we could stack them all, but we could create an ability to manage air risk. So we more or less created our own test range here. We were not one of the original test sites that were selected back in 2012-13, but we pretty much grew our own and started working on it, and it started to really come together. We also became the first tribe to be recognized as a public aircraft operator. So those of you in aviation understand what that means. It was a big honor, but it also opens up a lot of opportunities for us in the future. So the tribe itself, we're looking at things like being able to use drones for delivery we have our own food distribution network. We deliver food to a lot of our tribal members who are not able to leave their homes or get out. They may have limited mobility. So there's a lot of things that we do as terms of government services for tribal members and communities that really are prime for things like drone delivery. So we're excited about the future, how some of these things can come together. Like I said, we did do things like we bought our own ground-based radar system. We also are building out a range. The EDA announced this summer along with Senator Inhofe that we'd receive a grant to build the operations center. We're building a 35-acre complex for the test center on that 44,000 acres. We're taking 35 of it and turning it into a little test complex. We also received some other grants this summer to start building out the hangars that you see in the background. So this is all underway. The construction is underway and going very well. So we're building right in the middle of the rural area of the Choctaw Nation, something hopefully that's going to be involved in aviation for the next 30, 40 years or so. So we are a rural area, but it's interesting that the growth around us is impinging on us. We very much benefit from the economic growth happening in North Texas. It's moving our direction. We also are seeing the growth all around us. And so it's a very interesting situation in that it's providing economic opportunities for us, but it's also stressing our transportation networks. And I do serve as a transportation commissioner. So even though the pretty much the entire length of my career has been aviation, for the past several years, I've actually been getting involved in ground transportation and policy from a little bit different perspective, but it's been an interesting time to actually be in that role. So we look at this, and this is really sort of one of our philosophical positions, is that emerging technologies can be an equalizer of quality of life and safety for rural and remote areas. We believe that technology can allow us to leapfrog, and I'll talk about some of the problems that we have and how we solve those. If you live in a rural area with poor roads and a poor road network, it impacts your health in many different ways. One is that your zip code can sometimes be a death sentence if you have a certain condition or an emergency happen, because it can take an extended period of time for an ambulance or first responder or emergency workers to get to you. And so we have this situation where there are a lot of unavoidable deaths and health problems simply because of lack of rapid transportation access to services or products. Things as simple as an EpiPen can mean life or death in rural areas, or insulin, things like that. So we have a situation where we have a disparity between urban areas, remote areas, in sort of an inequity there in access to healthcare, access to quality of health services and providers. So we have this big challenge, and this is across pretty much the entire Choctaw Nation reservation. So this is something that's pretty common, and it's not just our area. A lot of remote rural areas of the United States have this problem. What excites me is when I think growing up as a kid, when I was a little kid, we still had party lines in southeastern Oklahoma. So that tells you how far we've come along. But if you look around the world when I was a young kid, you could really sort of identify a first world nation, advanced nation, by how much copper they had, either in the ground or in the air, these big complex copper networks that represented the telephone systems and communication networks. My access to knowledge as a young kid was my local library, the very few books they had there, or the 2 or 3 channels that sometimes I could get on television. That was literally my access to the outside world of history and knowledge. What's remarkable is that in my lifetime, in a single generation, with cell telephones and with the sort of that quick emergence around the globe, now places that didn't have that copper network, that had not been able to make those investments, were able to leapfrog. And now just about anywhere in the world, if you have a smartphone, you have in your hand access to the history of the knowledge of mankind, which is remarkable that this could happen within much less than a single lifetime. And that's how technology can really leapfrog. And I see the same challenges with transportation, how we're going to have to adapt that. My district that I represent is that Southeastern Part District 2. So it does border Texas. We have roughly 1,700 miles of highways, many of them not up to where we need them to be in terms of safety. A lot of problems with narrow shoulders, just road conditions. I have no miles of interstate highway at all within my region, but I do have a major freight corridor, which is US 69. So we carry sometimes more than most interstates carry in traffic. And yet we don't have the accommodations of an interstate. We have all of these miles of these roadways that are not quite up to where they need to be. That impacts safety, high numbers of accidents. It's life and death. People die because of that. And if we look at it, we are struggling just to keep what we have maintained. Our infrastructure funding, the way we fund our transportation networks, is usually backwards looking. It doesn't look forward and anticipation of economic growth like we're seeing in our area. It's always sort of how have things been? And it's a very backward looking way that we fund things. We're also seeing those types of budgets decline, like Administrator Herwert had said earlier about the trust funds declining. There's a lot of reasons that those are starting to diminish a little bit. So as I look out on the horizon as a transportation commissioner, I worry that we're going to have trouble sustaining what we have, much less trying to build much safer new networks. I think this is going to start to build this momentum and a very big need and demand that we look at alternative transportation ways. Can things, even something like drone delivery, if we can take cars off of the roadway to do simple deliveries that are somewhat mundane, we could potentially improve overall quality and safety of life. There's a big disparity if you look at the way society looks at ground transportation versus the way we look at aviation. Society has a tremendously high standard of expectation for safety. We do not tolerate accidents of any kind in aviation. And yet, if you look at our ground transportation since 2015 or so, after many years, decades where it was gradually declining, it started to increase again. People become distracted. We're becoming actually worse drivers. Humans are becoming worse drivers. We're becoming less safe, even though our automobiles have continued to improve in safety. There's a lot of things happening there. As humans, that the operator, we're becoming worse. And I believe at some point that society will look at that disparity, how we have now reached this almost golden age of safety in aviation, how safe it's become, and yet we're seeing our ground transportation become less safe. I think there's going to be, at some point, some sort of an action by society that says we can no longer tolerate this. We have to turn this around. And so I believe that we're setting up a situation where we are really ripe for major major disruptions in how we look at transportation, even in rural areas. I know that early on, we were talking about urban air mobility, and I actually took exception to using the word urban because there are just as many, if not more, compelling needs for new modes of transportation, type of transportation in rural areas. And I think that's going to be a major driver. I think that there's a lot of things that are going to come into place, like generational expectations and things. So I think we're on the verge of a big change in what society will accept and what society will do. So our predictions, I think we're going to see a lot of near-term activity with piloted and really sort of the crude eVTOL systems, like we were talking about some earlier today, the AAM systems. We do see a little bit clearer regulatory path to operations there that can be accommodated in the NAS. If you have a human pilot, we can do that today. UAS, we have a lot of hurdles to go through. As many of you know, we are working on the BVLOS ARC, Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC right now. So trying to get a draft put together. We still have a lot of things to do before we can see things like ubiquitous drone delivery. So our predictions are it will feel in immediate years, next 4 to 5 years, it will feel like eVTOL is moving faster than drones, but we think that they're both moving at a little bit increased pace right now. Basically, kind of the benefits we look at, our ground transportation will be increasingly more difficult. We can't sustain what we have, much less build new stuff. And we are seeing things like rural broadband. So when we were talking about CAVs and things earlier, we're going to have a lot of pieces that may be useful as we try to adopt new technologies. And we are seeing that convergence and overlap between ground and aerial. So this is going to be incredibly important. And then what's very, very important is the democratization of eVTOL. Earlier, one of the speakers had talked about the early days of the automotive industry, automobile industry. And one of the benefits there was, if you think about what Henry Ford did, he made the automobile affordable. He also paid a wage where people could afford to buy automobiles. He democratized the technology. And I believe we are ripe and overdue for really a democratization of the emerging aviation technology. And I think that will greatly benefit areas like the Choctaw Nation and rural areas that are like our own. So we are involved in community outreach. We've even attracted the attention of Bill Nye, the science guy, wanted to come visit. He was interested in doing. This is just as equally important as anything else we do, because we try to build that next STEM pipeline and let these young children know that they're going to be involved in policy decisions and things that are very complex, but they're going to be working on things that have not even been envisioned yet. And this is one of the biggest successes we've had, is actually creating interest and stimulation there. And we have a broad community across the entire reservation where people are ready for the technology. We get very positive anticipation. Literally, the questions we get are, when will we have it? When will we get this added convenience? And so this was a big surprise to me. I thought we would see resistance to these types of technologies and new modes of transportation. It's totally the opposite. We see anticipation and really some excitement about it. So with that, the Choctaw word is yakoki, which means thank you, and be happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Awesome, James. Thank you so much. Yakoki, that's great. Yeah, I not to take anything away from Blaine's presentation. I get to see a lot of that, but it's awesome to see a new, refreshing perspective dealing with a lot of the rural issues like you have there. We have similar of those in Utah. So I want to jump in with my own questions, but I'm gonna have to wait till the end, see if I can get my own in. It's hard to be a moderator and attendee at the same time. So let's move on to Clint Harper and his presentation, so we can get to those questions at the end as well. But Clint, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to present. So, if you have any issues with getting your presentation running, and we can help back you up. So.
All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you good.
Great. So I had a computer update last night after I tested this, and I'm having issues with getting my presentation up, but I think we can get going. I've shared my presentation with the team, and so those will be available afterwards. So jumping right into it to help us get.
Well, really quick, did you drop them into the share folder? Or?
Yeah, they're in the share folder.
Okay, we can pull it up really quick. Yeah, go ahead, Muriel, or one of you and your team maybe get that ready.
Okay.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
we'll pull it up.
So yeah, we'll run that from there, Clint. You're good. So as much as I'd love to see you, I know you can act out everything you have in your from your presentations I've seen, you can do really well with that, but we'll get some good backdrop for you.
Sure. While you're working on that, I can get going.
Great, Clint. Thanks.
So again, yeah, my name is Clint Harper, and at a high level, I think Chris captured a lot of what I wanted to say there. I want to make one minor correction to the bio. I have 23 years of aviation experience. Also have a Master of Metropolitan Planning and a graduate certificate in urban design from the University of Utah. And I currently spend the majority of my time in stakeholder engagement around advanced air mobility with the city of Los Angeles. In community and stakeholder engagement, you often hear the statement that you need to meet folks where they are. Well, this is a two-way street, and where I am is often, more importantly, how I got here. And so briefly, here's a little bit of a story of how I got here. Back in 1998, my life wasn't going as planned. I was installing fiberglass insulation at commercial and industrial sites, and it sucked. I wanted out. I tried college, but failed and dropped out. I tried vocational school, but again, I had to drop out. I needed a pathway to a better life, and aviation gave me that pathway by way of the Air Force. The Air Force provided me with a very diverse set of aviation skill sets. My career started out as a flight line aircraft maintainer, working on communications, navigations, and sensor systems. I also received training and experience in aircraft dispatching, airport operations, airspace management, airfield management, and airport planning. As my Air Force career winded down, I loved aviation, and I wanted to continue my journey after retirement. But I had to go back and finish that degree. It's something that eluded me throughout my career. Through my military travels, I became fascinated and infatuated with cities, particularly the cute European cities that were so easy to get around in. And so to that end, I enrolled in the urban planning program at the University of Utah. Through this program, I learned details about what makes cities work and transportation's role in all that. And I also learned about the impacts of past, perhaps well-intended decisions, that have resulted in unintended consequences today. I learned about the things that planners are challenged with providing solutions for every day, such as homelessness, food insecurity, and transportation inequity. And as I reflected on this, I didn't see aviation as doing enough to be a part of these tougher issues. And I started to become depressed. In the military, there's obviously a service component, and it's pretty clear how your service benefits others. I struggled with making this connection on the civilian side of aviation. And I want to pause here just briefly to call out the importance of the work that James is doing with the Choctaw Nation. One of the other things that kind of got me disillusioned with aviation is it's not a very diverse field. Not a lot of people that look like me in there. And I am of also a Native American background, Sisseton, Wahpeton, Oyote on my mother's side, and Dene Navajo on my father's side. And so the work that's being done on the reservations and the opportunities that advanced air mobility has to help communities that are disconnected, is tremendous. And so it's important to me that we build on that service component and try and do as much as we can to evolve aviation in a way that helps as many people as possible. So back at it, as I said, I struggled with making this connection on the civilian side of aviation, and frankly, I wanted out. But fortunately, I have a vocal group of mentors and a support system that encouraged me that I can change the aviation industry, but I had to do it, and I'd be most effective doing it from within. So I started brainstorming ideas on how to reintegrate airports, especially smaller general aviation airports, with their host communities. I wanted to exploit an airport's role as a multimodal facility and cultivate synergies and accompany all multimodal facilities. But I had a lot of work to do. Most within a city knew little of the airport's role or opportunities that I just talked about. So I shared these ideas with my leadership at UDOT, where I was working at the time, and particularly within the departments of planning and aeronautics. They saw enough value in my ideas that they created a new position for me and empowered me to explore my ideas more deeply. I had to break aviation out of its bubble, out of the echo chamber, and I had to get to outsiders. And these outsiders often happy to remain ignorant of aviation resources at their disposal. We had to get them engaged in discussions. So as I got to work engaging, I primarily focused on non-aviation stakeholders to help them understand their aviation resources. I wanted them to see the potential that airports embody as multimodal facilities, as potential as tools in economic development strategies and transportation demand management strategies. And as I started this work, aviation or advanced air mobility really took off, no pun intended. Integrating aviation into our communities was thrust into multimodal conversations everywhere, particularly in expensive launch cities such as Los Angeles, where nearly all major players had announced intentions of launching their first service. Aviation needed a community integration strategy, and thanks to my supporters and mentors and everybody that helped me in my career up to that point, I had been working on one. When the opportunity came to work with the city of Los Angeles and integrating this new technology, I couldn't help but throw my name in the hat, and was lucky enough to be selected as the city's and maybe even the world's first urban air mobility planner as the Los Angeles Urban Air Mobility Fellow.
That's awesome. Hey, I got your slides coming up here. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me, I wasn't sure if you're ready to get into them, or let me know where you need me to be, and I'll let you get back to it. Thanks.
We're good where we are, and I'll just cue you on with the next.
Perfect.
So we're good where we're at right now. All right, so the theme of this panel is staying on the edge. Staying on the edge requires being aware of what's going on and taking action to plan early. If you're reacting, as cities did with ride sharing and dockless e-scooters, you're not staying on the edge. All right. If you're not on the edge, you're also likely not informing how it all evolves. So, the rest of this presentation is really more about how Los Angeles has remained on the edge and advanced in urban air mobility conversations. And you can go on to the next slide. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about, and I'll keep this moving to save on time. So next. So a quick urban air mobility overview. So urban air mobility, taken back into like the most basic form of its definition, is just aviation operating within an urban environment. And Los Angeles has a pretty rich history of that, going back to the late 1940s with the Los Angeles Airways Airlines that provided passenger service from LAX to Disneyland, and also package and parcel service from LAX to various locations throughout the city. A lot of us are aware that the current tilt rotor aircraft are not new. Tilt rotor aircraft were introduced in the 80s and were also expected to be the next evolution that was going to bring aviation within the city cores and open up new levels of connectivity. But the complexity of working, with the hydraulics and everything else at the time really made that difficult. But we've had an opportunity through the military aircraft, military programs, and just constant research and development to perfect that. And that's what brings us into this electric age of aviation that we're entering into within now. Next. So here's a Los Angeles perspective. 2017, Uber announced urban air mobility in Los Angeles and hosted the first Uber Elevate conference. By 2019, we were envisioning skyports within the cities, and you can see a couple of the renderings that came out of a contest that Uber hosted there on the slide. And as a reaction, Los Angeles, this was just coming off the heels of the dockless e-scooter invasion that happened in a lot of cities, where we learned that technology is changing the way transportation is done. And to stay on top of that change, we needed to be ready. And so rather than being reactive, rather than sitting back and waiting for things to evolve, as we did with other technologies, Los Angeles wanted to get ahead of this, and they advertised an RFP to develop an urban air mobility policy framework that is in progress right now. Throughout 2020, Los Angeles participated in a variety of events to learn more about how advanced air mobility was evolving, where the technology was going. This included efforts with NASA and the Community Air Mobility Initiative, otherwise known as CAMI. Is a great resource for learning about how this new technology is integrating into cities and what the vision is and how we can engage to shape that vision. And so if you have any questions, you want to learn about how to get involved, it's definitely a great resource to look into. We got to the point to where we started wanting to create some high-level goals. And so we partnered with the World Economic Forum and created and adopted the principles of the urban sky. By December last year, Mayor Garcetti announced the Urban Air Mobility Partnership. And this year I was hired into the position. The UAM policy framework is in final draft and review right now. We're working on a vertiport sustainability model. And we're working on evolving some of the technology that we developed in response to the dockless scooters to maintain situational awareness over the operations of advanced air mobility aircraft. And that technology is the Mobility Data Specification, or MDS. And earlier this year, Mayor Garcetti testified with Mr. Grimsley before the House Aviation Subcommittee and really put out there the needs of the city, and not just Los Angeles, but of all cities, to be involved as we start pushing this along and evolving the vision for urban air mobility. Next slide. So what are we building on? I'll talk about the quote here from Mayor Garcetti. The FAA acknowledges that community engagement is critical for guiding the development of urban air mobility ecosystem, along with access to airspace and infrastructure development. This is where Los Angeles thrives, at the intersection of community engagement and guiding multimodal priorities. And so, as I alluded to before, I have had a lot of success with reframing aviation, airports, and the current facilities as multimodal facilities. All airports are multimodal, and with any kind of multimodal facility, you have synergies that come with that we have an opportunity to capitalize on. And so Los Angeles, has a pretty rich history of looking at transportation from a multimodal perspective. A lot of us are well aware of the transportation issues that exist within Los Angeles, primarily around congestion. And the city is working hard on trying to figure out how to leverage new modes and existing modes, more, excuse me, we got a scratch in my throat, more thoroughly, to get the system overall and moving people from point A to point B. And so that's the work that we're building on. We're layering on top of that the policy framework that the city has developed, the principles of the urban sky, and all the lessons that we're learning from the FAA and NASA partnerships, and the work that I'm doing right now with the stakeholder engagement. Next slide. Oops. So in just a brief overview of the principles of the urban sky, this isn't something that's just Los Angeles only. Like I said, this was developed in partnership with a host of a number of other municipalities, industry partners, and AAM ecosystem companies, into just trying to figure out at a high level, what are the things that we need to think about as advanced air mobility, urban air mobility starts to integrate in with the cities. And so safety, sustainability, equity of access, noise issues is a big concern in Los Angeles, multimodal connectivity, workforce development, and purpose-driven data sharing. All of these things, as we start looking at how technology is evolving, and not just within aviation, but on all other modes, as we start looking to a new future, how do we start bringing this all together so that we're not just creating a new mode of transportation that we layer on top of all the other modes of transportation, and doesn't complement it in any way, but adds new problems to the thing. That's what we want to avoid. And so that's the way we're thinking about this. Next slide. So the Urban Air Mobility Partnership, there's 4 main pillars of it, which includes the fellowship, which is the position that I'm holding right now. And as the Urban Air Mobility Fellow, I'm charged with carrying out a public engagement strategy, starting to develop the vertiport concept, looking at what vertiports look like within the city. And all the lessons learned between the two of those, we're going to put into a policy toolkit that just continues the evolution of how we're thinking about urban air mobility within the city. We want to empower city officials with the decision-making abilities and the information that they need to smartly integrate this and not repeat the same mistakes that we've made in the past with other transportation modes. Next slide. I see that we're only have 10 minutes left. So with the partnership, the public engagement, the stakeholder engagement is a huge part of this. Again, we've talked a lot about flying cars and the Jetsons, and a lot of us think of that, with affection. But on the other side of that, flying cars, Los Angeles, a lot of the problems with transportation is created by cars. We have a problem with pedestrian fatalities, bicycle fatalities. And so as we envision flying cars, while a lot of us see the Jetsons and some of the cool things that's possible with that, a lot of other folks see the problems that cars introduce into society, and they see things like road rage, drunk driving, problems like that. And if we're just going to bring that into the sky, that frankly sounds like a nightmare. And so we need to get away from that imagery and really reframe this as aviation. And that's part of the work that I'm doing. And then building on the principles of the urban sky, building upon that roadmap that we have. Next slide. So on the vertiport development side of things, one of the reasons that everybody wants to come to LA is, you can see in this top picture, is there are helipads, heliports everywhere. And people see opportunities in these facilities. What they don't realize is that these facilities are classified by what the FAA calls an emergency helicopter landing facilities, and they exist for a specific purpose. The purpose in Los Angeles is in emergency response. If there's a fire in the building or some other kind of emergency in the building where it's going to take too long to get down to the ground floor, or that would otherwise be obstructed, there's access from the top floor to aid in that. If you dig deeper into the permitting around these structures, each one of them has a conditional use permit tied to them that specifically says that this facility can only be used for emergency uses only. And there's a lot of complications and a lot of other details that we need to think about when we start looking at when we want to enable aviation operations, on one of these kinds of facilities, a rooftop facility or a facility within the urban environment, and how does that happen for commercial passenger use or freight delivery, cargo delivery? There's just a whole nother layer of complexity that we need to think about in doing that. And that starts with understanding, how are we going to look at zoning and permitting of the land use? How are we going to look at permitting of the infrastructure? How are we going to permit the operations? Administrator Huerta talked about the three legs, that the FAA kind of builds all of its regulations around. Well, these are the three legs, within cities that we're looking at on how do we understand how to integrate this safely and effectively, within the city. And it's all around the permitting, the zoning, and the regulatory landscape. And that's really what we're taking a deep dive into right now to understand how this all needs to evolve. Because right now, despite what you might see from the Google Earth image, we're not ready to bring in, a widespread adoption of aviation operations within the city core. There's still a lot to think about on that. Next slide. And Blaine talked about a lot of this really well and really articulately. And I think I know that some of the future panels are going to get even into more detail of this, but as we look at the intersections between UAM and CAV, we're looking at a future where, we're looking at mobility, more as a service. We're trying to get people from point A to point B. It's not the American dream of everybody having a car where, in 20 years, everybody's going to have an eVTOL aircraft in their driveway. We're looking at, the basic needs of transportation is get people from point A to point B. And so how does mobility, all the ranges of mobility options that we have available to us serve in that respect? We're all looking at an all-electric future. So all future multimodal hubs, including airports, vertiports, and everything else, are also going to be energy hubs. When we look at the V2X communications, they're all going to be also data and communication hubs. And they're going to drive new travel patterns. With regional air mobility looking to be one of the most prominent use cases, we're looking at bringing people into city cores from further out in the suburbs and exurbs, than before. And so this is going to drive just new living land use patterns, that we're going to have to think about. And, we definitely don't want urban sprawl 2.0, so how do we do this effectively and make sure that we're preserving the things and upholding the values that we have as a city. And for every city, that's different. And that's something that we need to recognize. The vision of the Jetsons and the flying cars, and we're going to solve congestions that the industry put out, at the onset of all this movement. That's the vision of the industry. That's the vision of the aircraft manufacturers. That's not necessarily the vision of the community. And if you're on the AAM ecosystem side, the industry side of this, it's important. We've been pleading with you since 2017. If you want to know how you can successfully get into a city like Los Angeles or any other city, you need to know, what are the values of the city? What is the city's vision for the future? And how can your technology accommodate that vision and make that vision possible? And so with that, I'll end the slide there and we can move on.
All right, sounds good, Clint. Thank you so much. Can James and Blaine can quickly get your video and mic back up again so we can jump into some questions here. So this, maybe you guys can all think about it, but we don't have a lot of time to go through a round discussion with all of it. But let me ask you this: as technology is evolving and changing, this is something I've experienced a lot in my job as well. How do you think agencies or organizations should make decisions on deploying new systems without taking on large risks? And some of our previous presenters touched a little bit on that, but maybe I don't know who might be best for that. Maybe Blaine, maybe start first, or Clint, you got a couple thoughts there.
Thanks, Chris. I'll jump in on that. I think you've seen three really good examples of that in these three presentations. My answer to that question always is just get out there and do something. Get out and deploy, get out and build, whether it be radar towers in the Choctaw Nation or UAM planning and development in Los Angeles or connected and automated vehicles in Utah. Get out there and do something. I think it was Michael Huerta who said, and start small in kind of a low risk thing, and then build from there as it develops. Technology will change, but the learning experience of deploying technology is retained as the technology changes. So that's what I would say. Just start, just do something.
Perfect. James, yeah, go ahead really quick.
Yeah, I would say that if we look at historically, like in aviation, where did all the technology come from? Historically, it was DOD. The DOD has these large sandboxes, which are restricted test ranges where they test. We never created the same thing for the civil world, either on ground transportation or aviation. What we need are places where we can assess, understand, and view the technology in use. We need sandboxes to allow us to move forward. That's what we're trying to build in Choctaw Nation. But society really needs to have an observation. They need a front row seat that can see this in some regular operation that can say, you know, we're acceptable with the risk. We can understand it. Let's move forward. Ultimately, we have to convince society. Without those sandboxes, and that is something I believe that we need to think about. How do we move forward about ground transportation and aviation? How can we pick these areas where we can accept a little bit more risk right now while we develop, while we demonstrate, while we work on policy, and while we assess? That's one of the biggest limitations we have right now.
I'll add on something on that.
Clint, yeah, jump in
as well. So back in 2016 at the UDOT's transportation conference, Carlos Braceras pointed out that in northern Utah, you know, being a geographically constrained urbanized area, the population is expected to double by 2060, I believe it was, and that we could not respond by a doubling of the lane miles within the area. You know, so we had to start thinking creatively about reutilizing the existing infrastructure that we have, getting better use out of that by changing land uses and understanding, you know, how we can get the most out of what we have. So to that, you know, in aeronautics, the response to that was, how can we look at that, you know, with the airports? How can airports anchor, you know, these new innovative land uses that's going to get more out of our existing transportation system? You know, and so when we talk about leveraging what we have to reduce the upfront cost and risk associated with bringing on something new, you know, in Utah alone, there are, you know, 46 airports. In California, you know, there's, I think of, you know, almost 200, you know, public use airports. You know, these are all facilities that are already have airspace issues worked out. They already have, you know, emergency response, you know, and everything we need to have aviation operate safely, you know, it's all there. And so, you know, in the same spirit of what James just mentioned about with the DoD sandbox, you know, we have facilities out there that are ready. We just need to engage the FAA, engage the state aeronautics divisions, and really, again, we need to start aligning our visions together so that we can see what's out there, see what's available to us, so we can start leveraging all that to our advantage.
Perfect, Clint. Thank you so much. Thank you also with James and Blaine for your time this morning to help paint that awesome picture. There's a couple of questions, but they all kind of overlap the same things with what you've already presented or what you've answered just now. So I think with that, besides we're out of time too, but that was excellent. Appreciate that. And now, like Blaine, you got to have me as a moderator, and then in a little while you'll have me as a presenter. So hopefully we can get onto that quickly. So all right, I'll turn it back over to the team, whichever that may be, Muriel, or move on to Paul Wheeler as the moderator for the next session. So thank you so much. And if you put your questions in the chat, we'll get them circulated to the right folks to answer at a later time. Thank you.